So here's some information about how to find good sources that are probably going to be appropriate for you in the context of this course. There's 6 tips here. You're going to have access to this document as well as this video. So the first overall tip is you need to be picky about what you look at. It's not good enough to just click on the first 3 websites that come up and assume that they're fine. You need to take a little bit of time and look at what that website is called, look at the URL, look at the description below to evaluate whether or not it's good enough for you. And I'm going to take you through an example to see what I mean in terms of the other tips. So this is really important when we are looking at social issues that perhaps there are 2 sides of, and you may be just wanting to find some neutral facts. So when you look at what we've searched here, you see that there's Wikipedia, there's an article from Time Magazine, Forbes, The Star, and if you go on the next page, we'll see some other ones. So if we look here, you can see that this is ChristianityToday.com, likely to be not as neutral as perhaps some of these new organizations might be. That doesn't mean that these articles don't have a place. Certainly, if you are a Christian, you might want to read Christianity Today to reinforce your point of view, to find out what other people who are like-minded are thinking about and what the issues are and all that kind of stuff. But for educational purposes, you're probably going to want to do something more along the lines of a CNN article or something like that. Okay, so there is information on your Google list that you can look at. So that's tip number 2, actually, is to use the information you can see before you click on a link. And you can see that even in the end of the URL, .gc.ca is the Canadian government, .gov tends to be American government sites, .on.ca are the Ontario government's websites. So you can certainly tell where something is coming from that way. If it's got the name of a city or a province or a state and .edu, that's likely an educational institution of some sort. The only thing there is sometimes I'm noticing there are student projects that get posted. So student presentations, Google Slides, PowerPoints, Prezis. So you want to make sure when you're looking at that stuff that maybe there is a professor associated with this is Professor so-and-so's notes for their class, or that this is something that's been posted on purpose by the institution, not by a student that goes there. Newspaper articles are always great. Any city or town that ends with words like Star, Herald, Post, there's others, those are newspapers. So the Toronto Star is a newspaper, the Calgary Herald is a newspaper. And we had some of those somewhere here, I believe. Again, different from something like Dissent Magazine. Just the word dissent makes me wonder what they're up to. Probably have an agenda. Number 3, once you go into the site, you want to look for a couple of things. You want to look for citations. If there are statistics, numbers, facts, those should be cited. Where did those come from? So let's just check and see. If we go here to the BBC, now it depends on what they're writing about. So this is sort of the a chronology, it looks like, of how same-sex marriage became legalized. Now I don't see in-text citations, nor do I see a person who authored this. However, it is on the BBC's website, so that in and of itself makes it more legitimate. How do we check for bias? Tip number 4, how do we check for bias or opinion? Unless you want to summarize an opinion, so if you're writing an argumentative essay, it might be helpful to have the opinions of different groups involved in an issue. Most of the time, that's not going to be the case. So, for example, We were looking at this in my face-to-face class the other day, and one of the groups was researching homeschooling to see what would come up. And they found a homeschoolers association that had all kinds of facts and figures and great information about homeschooling. But my question to them was, even if we assume, and it probably is safe to assume that the information on the website was true, it's one-sided. The Homeschooling Association exists to help people homeschool their children. So they're probably not going to report on their website any of the possible negative impacts on your child of homeschooling them, if there are any. I don't even know. But they're probably not going to choose to include that information. And why would they? They have an agenda. They are trying to support people who are homeschooling, and they're trying to get more people doing it because they think it's a great thing to do. So again, I'm not saying that any of these websites don't have a purpose. It's just a matter of whether or not the information is suitable for an education environment, which is something different. Tip number 5, can you find out who wrote the facts? This is becoming more and more difficult. Newspapers and magazines aren't necessarily giving individual people credit for their work like they used to. And so it is becoming difficult to say exactly who wrote what. So sometimes it's not necessarily about the author, finding an author, but it's about looking at the information source itself. So somewhere here there was Time Magazine or The Star, so that's the Toronto Star. And let's see whether we have an author. We do. In this case, we do. So bylines are not all gone, but they're not 100% there all the time anymore either. The other thing is, if you're in a website that has been produced by an organization, there should be usually either at the top or the bottom, especially if you go to the home page, there would probably be an About Us section. Here we go, About. There's a history of the Toronto Star, how it works, what they do, charities, and who's involved. Sometimes when you're looking here for different organizations, you'll see people with credentials like their master's degree or their PhD. That means they have a lot of education, and if it's a neutral website, neutral organization, that's great. If you really can't find anything like this, then I would suggest you just keep looking. Tip number 6 is just for Googling in general. Change your keywords. One of the things I find grade 12 students are notorious for is if I give them a sort of long-winded question that explains the information I want them to go and find, they will type that whole sentence or two into Google and expect Google to miraculously find that little piece of information that they want. Oftentimes, if you go a little bit broader, so if your topic is, if you're focused on trying to find the top 3 causes of divorce in Canada, it might make more sense to just Google divorce Canada and see what comes up. Okay. So whenever you're looking for information, and you will be looking for a lot of information this semester, I will often have you give me the link to where you found your facts. And this is sort of the bar. This is where the bar is. You need to be following these 6 tips at all times to make sure that you're finding good information. The reality is there's lots of information out there. Your job is to sift through. So again, instead of just Googling your topic and saying, okay, this one, this one, this one, off I go, it's important to start by just looking here before you even click into anything. Look before you click. Okay, that really, I think, is the overall tip. That, for me, is very helpful when I'm doing research to find information for students, is I look and see, where is this coming from? What's the synopsis? What is the name of the URL? Because if it's not something either, I mean, I'm older and I've done research a lot more than you guys, which means that I sort of have the advantage of knowing, you know, what some sources are just by looking at the URLs. They look familiar to me, whereas they might not always for you. But certainly you'll get used to it as we go. And when you find good places, so for instance, if we were looking at statistics and we found StatsCan, if you see StatsCan in your list and you're looking for Canadian stats, click that one. Before you click anywhere else, click that one. Okay, that's about all I have to say about good sources. Happy Googling, everyone.